First redacting, this time tackling the subject of fantasy football, which might turn a lot of people off, but I challenge you to listen. Find the diamond in the rough, as Ford says. We're a Fordless podcast today.
Leaner and meaner today.
Leaner, meaner.
No, not meaner.
Greener.
Leaner and less mean.
Leaner and nicer.
Leaner and nicer. Yeah.
I don't know. He's not mean.
He's not mean.
No.
He's not mean.
But I think so what he always says is finding the signal in the noise. And so I'm sure there's some signal in the noise.
Well,
today.
And hey, there's a great tie in there because one of the most prominent fantasy football analysts is Brad Evans, and he calls himself the Noise, Yahoo Noise.
That's right.
Yeah. So there's a direct tie in there.
Yeah. Okay, so before we get started, let's take the simultaneous sigh. I really like. I don't know how you feel. How do you feel about the simultaneous sigh?
I don't like it.
You don't like it?
I don't like it. No, I don't know why. I'm fine with it though. I'm not like
I don't
gritting my teeth.
but I hate it.
I'm
fine with it, but I hate it.
I don't like it, but I don't hate it. It's fine. It's fine.
All right. Well, let's take this simultaneous sigh because I like it.
It's your podcast, so yeah.
It's our podcast, but I like the sigh. So let's together blow out and take a sigh together. Is it too intimate for you?
I'm probably I've got I had like a septoplasty at one point because I had a deviated septum, and I don't think it repaired it that well, and so I think I'm probably just self-conscious of just sounding wheezy or something. Maybe it is partially too. We've talked. What was it we talked about with ASMR. ASMR was where we talked about for some people it's like a sexual thing, but for some people it's just intimacy. I think it was ASMR that we talked about with that. So maybe it is. I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe that's another. Maybe that's another reverse redaction. Intimacy issues.
Yeah, we haven't reverse redact ASMR. That would be a good thing to reverse redact.
Yeah, I would have to check it out a little bit more. I think when we talked about it before, it was in the middle of something else, and I just talked about how I think Bob Ross was my ASMR before ASMR existed. So I can check that out sometime, and we can do one of those.
Okay. But today we're talking about fantasy football, and I would like to start off by saying that to me, fantasy football is not about sports.
Right.
It's about a community. I think it has turned into. I think the wild popularity of fantasy football has grown because of the growing community of analysts, but I think Ford and I and you talk about the the medium. We talk about Jordan Peterson talking about this new technology, riding this wave of new technology, and I think fantasy football has been a huge benefactor. No, huge has benefited hugely from podcasts in particular.
Yeah,
and that's how I got into podcasting. My first listening to podcasts it's always been fantasy football. It always comes back to fantasy football for me as far as podcasts. I listen to a lot of fantasy football podcasting.
Interesting.
And I think fantasy football really, I think it really took my soul when I started to get into the not the analytics of it, but the analysts themselves. I started to, it's like it's something like sitcoms where you feel like you're part of the group. You
Okay.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
So using I statements, I feel like I'm part of a group of friends. You know, whenever I tune into to their podcast, and it helps. I think it helps. And it's something that I was sort of I'm critical of our podcast is that the fantasy football podcasts have something unique in that they give value, like real like tangible value.
Yeah.
It's like a how to in every one of them. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like
Yeah.
it's got morsels of information. That's why I kind of was like with you and I were trying to do a little bit of news type stuff, but that I don't know.
Hmm.
You
Well,
have to,
and too with fantasy football, I mean, I don't play any leagues that are not for money, and so they're not
I know
only.
forever I tried to get in a league with you and invite you to our league, and you wouldn't because we don't have money. We
And
don't
then
do
we
money.
accidentally got in a league together. um,
So tell that story. I think that's really funny.
yeah, sure. So, well, I'll just finish off
Yeah,
that point
finish it.
to say, yeah, like what you're saying is that, exactly right in terms of,
Mm.
they do give, like a tangible, value towards, something, a type of competition, even if you weren't playing it for money. It's so, but especially when you are playing it for money, you just multiply that, um, exponentially. But yeah, so yeah, I guess you and I have never been in a league together, right?
Never.
Okay, because I used
Weren't you?
to.
You were even in the free league with Steven.
Yeah, Steven's like he or somebody in his family used to do one like way back when, and I was in one with him at one point. But yeah, and then I way back when used to do a private league mostly for like people I worked with. But then I got out of that, and it's been several years since I did it because I just stopped caring. Like if there wasn't money on the line, I didn't care. Like bragging rights for me aren't as big of a deal. But so anyway, I've drafted like half a dozen fantasy football teams or so. And so I went in to look at one of mine, uh, and I saw, the guy that I was playing in week one looked like he had changed his name and his avatar, I think, or something like that. And I don't know if it was even like consciously registering in my head, but I was just like, uh, but I could like see this tiny little face because he put his face on there. And so but those on Yahoo, those little profile pic avatar things are tiny. And so I
Yeah.
could just kind of see like that's weird. And the name was, a little bit familiar or whatever. And so I went in and clicked, and it was Judah Buddha. And it was Judah's face on this little Zen Buddha guy. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm playing Judah in week one in a public league. Like I think it's a $50 buy-in league. And we just happened to randomly get in the same league, which I mean, is not that crazy, but
It
for that,
feels kind of crazy.
yeah, I don't know how many people. It is a little bit. I don't know how many people, like how big the pool is, like what the odds would be. I would be curious to know that. But what really was crazy for me was that we were in the same league, and you had, a team name and a profile pic that I would recognize, because I mean, you could have just done anything. And then we're playing each other in week one,
Uh,
and that was really the crazy thing.
Absolutely.
So
Let's see. Let me see if I can share my screen so people if people ever watch this, can see. Uh, uh, yeah. I see. I used to be. Well, okay, so when I first started, my name was Romney Ryan 2000, whatever it was, 2012. Romney Ryan 2012,
when you
and
first started fantasy football, or this season?
no, when I first started to do any kind
Okay.
of
Okay. I didn't
like,
know if you were just like hanging on to that one forever,
well, I didn't
just
know.
weren't gonna.
I hung on to it for until Trump, and then
Hmm.
I changed it to Trump 2000, whatever it was, 2020.
20.
Yeah, Trump 2020. And but then I got so much hate. I was like,
Right.
I gotta change. I didn't want to get fired too. I was working for a very liberal company,
uh,
and so I switched over. So commonly, I'm commonly referred to by my students and stuff as Judah Buddha. I it used to be a thing when I'd go to
Okay.
schools to do any kind of outreach, they call it, any kind of promotion. I'd say my name is Judah Buddha, and I'd say it's mainly because of the stomach, or something, some funny stuff to get kids' attention. And stock Judah Buddha, and I don't know, it rolls off the tongue.
It does, yeah.
And so I joined my first $100 league was my work league when I was working for Becoming a Man youth services, and youth guidance. I mean, and I made this video because I thought I was going to dominate. I had all these great players, Beckham and Bell, and I had a ton of like really good players. I didn't even make the playoffs because Beckham got hurt, Bell got hurt. I had Sean Watson, he got hurt. Yeah, it was. And then, anyways, well, yeah, we don't want to talk about that. But anyways, so I made that little avatar of me sitting squat, looking like a Buddha.
Oh yeah.
Here, let me share the screen here. Mm-mm-mm. Application window. So this is I'm actually wearing a green screen and some never nude shorts. And yeah.
Okay, so that whole photo is you then.
That whole photo, those are my
Okay,
hairy legs.
See, I didn't know. I thought maybe you just like took you found some kind of little Buddha online body like that and just stuck your head on it or something.
I went all in.
Wow. Yeah.
And look, this is so you can see we even already have a trade.
We even have a trade. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyways, but I want to get deeper than just the. That's why I bring us to the subject of the podcasting and the networking and the not networking, but the community, the fantasy football community.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about the noise. What's his name? Brad Evans.
Brad Evans, yeah.
I can't stand any of the big guys. So like Brad Evans, I can't stand what's his name? Who was in Avengers?
Matthew Berry. I can't stand. I made him mad on Twitter one time.
What did you do?
He yeah, you can tell he's just one of those guys that like, because I mean nowadays he's more insufferable than ever because he's just constantly like making tweets about Avengers and how he was in Avengers, and because he like somehow he was like friends with he was in some sort of thing with like their kids. His kids was in some program with Joe Russo's kids in LA or something. I don't know. And so anyway,
so he's friends with Russo, and
so he
got like this huge, like it's a huge role for a nobody.
I know. I don't even know. Like he said he even thought it was just going to be some nothing role, and it ended up being for a non-actor. Like, I mean, there's a lot of like people that are, doing this full time that don't get roles like that. So yeah, that was crazy. Now he posted, so anyway, he's just obviously like really vain about certain things. And so, he posted a video one time it was a FaceTime, like something had happened, a trade or an injury or something. And he just posted this quick little, video to Twitter about it. And the first, like the preview image for it just had him making this weird face. And I wasn't trying to troll him or anything like that. I just thought it was kind of funny. It was just an especially funny preview image. And so I made some crack about, grandpa who doesn't know that his camera's on or something like that. And he got mad. There were all these other replies, like literally hundreds of replies in this thread. And he picked mine out. It was just like in the middle of it, and he's like, oh yeah, you're trying to clown me on that. And you're using a joke that's 8 years old or something like that. I'm like, dude,
I actually think I saw that. Sometimes they will post these tweets on Bleacher Report.
Oh, really?
And that was you.
Yeah. I was like, good grief, because Matthew, one guy I do like to interact with is Andy Behrens.
Yes, yes.
Andy's got this really dry sense of humor, and he goes for jokes that are not like predictable, you know. And so I'm used to kind of like interacting with him a little bit, and to a lesser extent Brad Evans. But I've even done stuff with Brad Evans where like kind of like, you know, poking at him, but not in a mean way. And he'll like they take it really well. And so yeah, so when Matthew Berry did that, I was like, wow, okay, well, never mind.
Well, so I think it goes along with the theme of one of the themes that we hit on here on Reverse Redaction, and that is the like overthrowing the the Christmas cathedral, through technology and connection, like we're doing now, and I think that's why it's all these little podcasts. So one of my favorites, let me just kind of hit on it, but I think there is a real theme of the little guy getting notoriety, getting success, while these big guys like Evan, what's his name?
Brad Evans, Matthew Berry.
Who's the one for NFL.com? I can't stand his face.
I don't really follow, like Yahoo and ESPN are about the only analysts that I really follow. And I mean, I really just at this point just kind of follow them for entertainment more than
to troll
advice.
them, call them grandpas.
No. I like to look at like their composite rankings and stuff like that. But like, I do listen to their podcast. I do listen to the Yahoo Sunday morning podcast because that's good. Like it's got like good injury updates and stuff like that. So
okay. Yeah. Well, I see. The one, my favorite, I would have to say my favorite, the guy I come back to, you'd probably like him, is Matthew Harris from Harris Football.
Chris Harris.
Why did I call him? I guess Matthew. Who's Matthew Berry?
Matthew Berry and Chris Harris. Chris Harris used to work at ESPN.
Christopher Harris. So yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Like that's one of my best stories. Are my favorite stories. So narratives is the fact that he left ESPN, and he talks about how, the foibles of being in the big ESPN industry. And he all he does is have his own podcast,
I wonder what he makes off that though,
I think he does really well. I really do. Now he also writes books, and he sells like every year he has this what is it called, the fantasy, it's like some kind of digest that he does, basically the same thing he used to do for ESPN, but he goes through each player and kind of gives a little funny tidbits, but also some really actionable information.
Yeah, I've checked his site once in a while because I did like him when he was with ESPN, and then all of a sudden he was just gone. And that's a little more, seems like that's a little more rare in fantasy, because normally like those guys stick with the place they've been for a while, or if they leave, like I don't know, somehow I just notice it, but he just suddenly just seemed to be gone. And so I looked up like, well, where'd he go? And then I saw he had his own site then.
Yeah, and his site, he hasn't really taken advantage of the site as much. Because he just does so well with his podcast, and now he does videos. I don't know if you've ever seen any of his videos. But so he's part of this huge, I would say, not huge, but this schism in the fantasy world between like how to discern who's going to be, how to discern what player is going to be successful and that sort of thing, how to predict success in the NFL and stuff like that, where he is like, he even says he's like a Nazi against, he doesn't say he's a Nazi, but he's Nazi-esque against people predicting situation.
Oh yeah.
He predicts based off of his own, he watches a lot of tape. So he talks about tape. He calls his followers tapeworms because he talks so much about tape. He hates when anybody um, brings up yards per carry or anything like that, and how asinine that is. And he has this thing called crutch argument, where so the typical crutch argument would be, oh, this running back's going to be great because they have no wide receivers, but he says, well, it's just like, how do you hear the same on the other side? You hear somebody else say, oh, this running back's going to be terrible because they're going to be able to focus solely on on the run game.
Well, to me, it's almost kind of like one of those GIFs or GIFs, whichever way you want to pronounce it.
On the reverse redaction, we say GIFs.
Okay, good, because that's what I say.
Okay,
I say GIFs of peanut butter.
Yes, so, exactly.
Yeah. But it's kind of like one of those GIFs of the person like seeing all the mathematical formulas going across. I mean, it to a certain extent. I mean, in some ways, I think sometimes it's the complete reverse of that, because you'll have just decisions made because you've got some kind of like old school coach who just believes, no, we got to do it this way or whatever. But in terms of like trying to predict fantasy success, I think it's kind of one of those things, because you've got all these things that you got to take into consideration, from the team's schedule to the player's ability, to the other players around them, to the coach, to the scheme, to, injuries, to, weather. Just all these little things where it's almost like this, Venn diagram where you're trying to find, you got all these circles overlapping. You're trying to find like, gosh, where's that little spot where you can kind of predict what this player is going to do. And I think to a certain extent you can kind of do that, but it's just so, it's so unpredictable.
It is. But I mean, but here's the thing, Jared, everything in life is unpredictable.
True.
And this is like when people, and when Chris talks about like, oh, situations unpredictable, everything in life is unpredictable, and I think that's what makes fantasy football so interesting, is that you're given data points, and you can connect the dots, and I love that. And as a man, we've talked about this on the podcast before, is maneuvering, the necessity for guys to be able to maneuver, to be able to manipulate their surroundings towards success. I think it's why people get addicted to gambling. Why you see a lot of like, dads ruining their lives over gambling, because they feel like they can predict it, but with gambling there's no data points, right? Like a lot of times.
No, I think you're exactly right. And a lot of times people, men tend to get a lot of their value from their job or from their work. And I think especially then if you're, seems like, people more and more are in positions where you're either a drone or something kind of like a drone, and you're not the one making the decisions. You have to execute the plan, and you may be the fall guy if it doesn't go right, but you're not the one making the decisions. And so I think with fantasy football, you get that power to do whatever you want to do with it. So
almost as if you have your own, like you're actually a commissioner or a
GM,
coach, a GM.
Yeah.
And there are like real complicated fantasy leagues where there is like GM type decisions you have to make. I'm not part of any of those. Have you ever been part of that where like you have to, like they have salaries? Each player you take has a certain salary cap you have to pay attention to.
No, I that would be really interesting. I would kind of like to try one of those, but I've never done one of those.
Maybe we can try one next year. Do a live draft or something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of just like, I guess, carrying out like an auction draft, but just like carrying it on through the season, sort of, right?
Yeah. Well, have you ever been on a dynasty league?
I
It's like a
was,
dynasty league.
yeah, okay. I was for a couple of years, but it was like a work league, and yeah, I didn't stick with it or whatever.
Yeah. And so if we haven't, so if anybody's watching, you're like football, schmootball. I hate football. Like Ford. Ford probably like he hates this. Like what is it called? Consumer sports like football, basketball. What would you call it? Like
Um,
what would the category be of normal sports?
what you would like, how you would classify like all normal like traditional sports?
Yeah. So like there's esports and sports.
Yeah, like I think it's just sports.
I just the category of sports just seems so broad though, because it could like include like t-ball and
Yeah, but
NFL.
yeah, it is broad. Yeah. Well, but see the way that you get like,
Mainstream sports maybe.
yeah, I mean
Main
mainstream sports, because it is like sports is maybe, I don't know.
broadcast sports.
I think just sports.
All right.
But see, the way to get Ford involved, at least I don't know if we could. Yeah, he would never be interested really that much in sports. But the way you get him involved in fantasy football is just trick him. You just say like, dude, did you know that like fantasy football, the model for it was based off of Austrian economics?
Let's do that. We've got to do that.
Right.
Oh, there is an economic aspect to it. The
Yeah.
ecosystem, I think, I didn't realize. So football in particular fits so well. Like it scratches such an itch for me.
Mhm.
I was always growing up. I was always a basketball guy.
Yeah.
Never ever cared about football. Baseball, I cared about tacitly. My dad really enjoyed the Expos. I watched. Basketball was my main thing. I spent so much money on basketball cards, and I think that was the tie-in for me. Is once I got into fantasy football, like that the same juices came out, like the salivary glands of like, and instead of collecting cards that eventually become worthless, you're buying into ideas. And
Hmm.
I want to come back to this idea of a community of people that all share the same, kindred spirits that all share the same. And it's not jocks.
Right.
I think that's the key. Is it's not jocks. It's all kinds of different people, because everybody can be involved. And it's
I think like
intelligent people.
right. Yeah. I think the like highest winning or highest grossing fantasy football player is I've read a story on him one time. He's just this complete nerd who knew nothing about football. But he's one of those guys that just understands, like, I don't know if sabermetrics is the term used like in actual like baseball and things like that. So I'm not sure if like
I've heard that term.
sabermetrics. Yeah, I'm not sure if
Sabermetrics.
sabermetric. Yeah, I'm not sure if it's still, if that's the correct term to apply to fantasy football analysis or whatever. But whatever it is, whatever is the term for it. Like, he's just one of those guys that just understood all of that really well, and just probabilities and stuff like that. And so he got it. He like just researched. Basically, he just researched the NFL and football a little bit, and combined with his knowledge of that, and he's just one of these guys that just wins tons and tons of money at it. So,
do you know his name?
I don't off the top.
It's
of my
not
head.
Smiz, right?
I would not know it. I would not remember it, but I would probably, if we found the actual article, I would probably, it would pop back into my head. But yeah, I don't remember his name, but I know that about him. Like, he was never played sports, never, watched sports, but he just understood. And honestly, that really is what it's about. To me, is it's just about understanding, and like, honestly, last season, this sounds, I don't know, it just sounds like I guess like I'm bragging, but in terms of my overall season, I didn't have the best season that I've had. I still made money. I didn't really draft that well, I don't think, at the beginning, partially because Yahoo made some changes, and so they got rid of one of the receiver positions and added a flex position, and I didn't really put enough emphasis on running back.
Mm.
And also didn't, in years past, I had emphasized like getting an elite tight end more, and I didn't really last year. And I think I that hurt me too. So certain things in the draft hurt me. But in terms of like week to week game management, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times I would go against what analysts were recommending in terms of who to play over so and so.
Mm.
And like 9 times out of 10, it would be the right decision, and maybe that was just a fluke season. But it started to seem like, I don't know, with like the week to week play this guy over this guy sort of thing. I've really become distrusting of fantasy analysis. I feel like they just have so many players to try to keep up with
Yeah.
and manage that I can be
Yeah.
more plugged into my guys and understand their respective situations better. That it just seems like they don't have the time to really on a week to week basis drill down on who's going to have a better matchup here.
Yeah, I do not listen to any of the like Yahoo or other than Barron's, Andy Barron's. Andy Barron's is actually a longtime good friend of Christopher Harris, but
Yeah, okay.
and he comes on the show a lot. But the whole predict like the on the app. So for anybody who doesn't know what we're talking about, that like the crux of fantasy football is having it on your mobile. Like before mobile phones, fantasy football was still around, but not half as enjoyable.
Yeah. I've seen stories of like guys who used to play a league, and I guess this was even like before the internet, even like not only just before mobile apps, but before the internet. And so they would like have like a league bookkeeper or whatever who would like have like a spreadsheet and then would like tally up players points and stuff per week and stuff like that. And to back to your point about if anybody who doesn't, I hope anybody who's still watching at this point probably knows about fantasy football, but just in case you don't, since we're on that subject, like, so the whole thing is basically you just draft real players, mostly offensive players. You get like a team defense or whatever. But you draft real offensive players, quarterback, wide receiver, running backs, tight ends. And you get a certain number of ones for each position, like pretty close to what you would have on a real team, other than, you're not typically going to have, 2 or 3 running backs, but, those guys, you get matched up against another team, in your league, another GM like yourself, each week. And your players get points for the number of yards they get, the number of touchdowns they get, things like that. And then whoever has the most points, at the end of the weekend or whatever, wins for that week. And so you just basically play along through the regular season, and it cuts short a little bit by a couple of weeks. And then you have your own version of playoffs and the Super Bowl. So
yeah. And originally when I was invited to join, I thought football is, just brainless. Why would I? But there is so much that goes for when people talk about 4D chess. Football is, you should be saying just football instead of 4D chess, because there are so many levels to it. There is deception that's involved, where you show one thing and then you have your guys, so they're in a certain, so the formations that people take, I've barely got to, I barely dug in a little bit, to what these different formations and positions are. But there's so many positions. There's, the difference between before I getting into fantasy football, I had no idea that there's a defense and an offense, and neither of them cross paths, on the same team. What?
Oh, wow. So your football knowledge was really, really limited prior. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, I hated football. I thought it was stupid. It looked boring. But but playing fantasy football helped me understand the war planning that goes into it. You know, the art
Mhm.
of war, the strategy that is. But now it's getting more complicated. Where it
Mhm.
used to be, you know, old school football used to be the running back barreling through, you
Mhm.
know, having a good offensive line and the running back barreling through and getting as far as you can time and time again until you surprise them with a pass, you know, a very simple 2D type, you know, passing and running.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say, yeah, I think you know it's kind of all sports, um, but have done this, but especially with football, it really has become you know much more cerebral, but cerebral even on the physical level too of like athletes maintaining their bodies and stuff like that.
Mm,
It's just like that whole sport has has undergone probably I would say the most change because like
yeah.
you said it's become much more you know much more cerebral and but too you know like the game is just constantly evolving and rules are changing more so than other sports like baseball or stuff like that you know
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah. But there has been a wave of young. So there's been creative. I think as more money gets involved, and you know, owners want to retain attention and get new viewership. I think they've taken gambles on creative coaches like Andy Reid, and no, he paid off. Who was the Philadelphia Eagles guy? I always forget his name.
the recent one.
No, the one who totally failed. The from college.
Oh,
He's the
Chip
college.
Kelly. Chip
Chip
Kelly.
Kelly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he came in and totally trying a completely different approach to the
Mm.
offense. And what can you tell me? What can you teach me about that? Like he had like a
Yeah.
spread, or it was like a college type offense, right?
Yeah, it was a college type offense. He came from Oregon, and Oregon's just this little Pac-12. Um, College football conferences are all very different, you know.
Mm,
So the SEC, Southeastern Conference, like where Alabama and Georgia and stuff plays, it's much more of a it's the closest to the NFL. Other conferences like Oregon, where they're not recruiting as typically as good of athletes, a lot of times like they'll have some sort of gimmick, and so Oregon had sort of a gimmick, and it worked to a certain extent against better teams too. They made it to you know a national championship game and made it to the playoffs a couple of times, um, but theirs is based much more on like just speed, like spread, like get a bunch of fast guys,
mm,
spread the field, and just like put up tons and tons of points. And they had no defense, and so you
mm.
get some games that are like borderline
But
basketball scores. But
Chip Kelly had pretty so he added the component of defense on top of it, right? So he sort of mitigated for the difference in because
mm,
he had pretty tough defenses.
for the Pac-12, they were okay at times, but his defenses weren't
But I mean
like
in the NFL,
in the NFL. Uh,
it's almost like he had a hybrid where he said, "Okay, we're going to take the NFL type defense, bulk it up, you know,
mhm.
but again focusing more on speed, which I think was interesting." So like the difference I saw, he sort of ushered in this small wide receiver, whereas it used to be the prototypical wide receiver was this tall Julio Jones, like lanky, strong, you know, guy who would lumber out there and just jump over everybody, you know, catch the ball. And he introduced the speedy who was it? Deshaun Jackson, right? Like just this little guy who could just run you know, just like race out in front of everybody and catch the ball.
Uh, I don't know if I would say that he really introduced that. He like that's what he
But
that's kind
no,
of
but he popularized it, I would say.
I don't know. I think you're giving him. I think you're giving him too much credit. I just look back on him and I guess kind of his tenure there as man. I don't know. I think there were a couple of good things maybe to pull from it, but
Mm.
he just had all kinds of problems. Part of the problem was the problem that a lot of college football coaches, we're kind of getting off the subject of fantasy now, um, but that a lot of college football coaches face is going from coaching 20-year-olds that are sort of, you say jump and they say how high, to
Mm.
coaching millionaires who
Mm.
have made their money, and like you have to find better ways to motivate them, and so there was a lot of like rebellion against even like his practice methods.
Mhm.
So anyway,
But just in that little caveat that as we talk about different coaching styles, that's like when we talk about 4D chess with um with football, just every coach having their own, like, and the more successful popular coaches even having their own trees.
mm,
People talk about coming from the Andy Reid tree of coaching,
yeah,
where they have such a particular way, approach and strategy, that that you see that coaches, assistant coaches coming from their program, they call it coming from their tree.
yeah.
So Andy Reid tree often here, the
Belichick tree,
Belichick tree.
which hasn't produced a lot of fruit, but
Not yet,
yeah,
not yet, but
yeah.
we are seeing a little, but not to get off the topic. So fantasy football, the points of data is just it's such a deep well. There's just so much information to be mined that, to me, it's just it scratches the researcher itch in me.
Hmm.
It's almost like every time I sit down to draft, it's like researching for an essay. Like doing research and seeing, like,
You have
getting.
a lot. You have a lot more fun with essays than I do.
I do. I no, I love essays.
I've never had anywhere near as much fun with an essay.
Oh, okay. Well, I I see, I've always enjoyed researching.
Mm,
Now I haven't always enjoyed writing for deadlines, in school, but in school one of my favorite things to do is write papers. I love,
mm,
as you have seen, like, I love talking about stuff that I'm interested in,
mm.
as we're doing.
Yeah.
And doing it in a systematic way, I think gives me a sense of satisfaction, that just like putting all my thoughts out there. Like, I like argumentation in the form of same as you.
Mm.
You're better at it, but having
Mm.
points, having a premise and backing up,
Yeah.
the
Debate.
premise.
Sort
Debate.
of debate. Yeah.
And to me, that's what essays were: debate on paper,
Yeah.
one-sided, I guess, huh?
Yeah. 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 No, yeah, I love debate, which is, again, why, well, I mean, we have a certain amount of debate in some of these things. I mean, a lot of times we are generally on similar pages and stuff like that. Yeah, but I love
Mhm.
debate, and I mean, for me, it's just what I love. Like at the core of it all is competition. I've
Mm.
always been competitive. I've always been competitive in everything, and so
Mm.
and I think just like in life to a certain extent too. It's kind of like um stuff that drives me is just like, I don't want to feel like I got beaten by that, so
Mm.
you can take that too far, but for me, at the like the very, like, if you dig down to the deepest level, for me it's about competing with people and like testing myself and seeing, can I beat, at this. So
And fantasy is a thinking man's game.
yeah.
Like, you're athletic, but you're also an
Mm.
intelligent guy.
I'm not really athletic. I exercise, like like
You you
I wasn't athletic in terms of sports, but yeah.
you were never. I always thought of you as a sports guy, but Like you never were you never participated in sports?
I played like basketball in like middle school for a couple of years, and I was a good shooter.
Mhm.
But apart from that, I wasn't really that good at it. And then like once you get to high school, like especially with the coach that our school had at the time, like just the level of commitment that you
Mhm.
had to have for it was so dramatic. I mean, this was a class A. If I don't know if you know anything about high school sports or whatever, but like the size of schools go anywhere now. They go anywhere from like single A to 7A. At
Oh
the
wow,
time,
I
at
didn't
the
know there
time,
was.
yeah, because it's based on size. At the
Yeah.
time, I think it was just single A to 5A. So we were a single A bad team. And the coach we had at the time came from a basketball family and just these rich
Mhm.
traditions and stuff. And just like would run players until they were throwing up. And I mean, so the level of commitment. So yeah, I didn't pursue it beyond middle school just because like the level of commitment required and for the return you got, like I was never going to be getting
Right.
a college scholarship or something. So just wasn't worth it. But I was always like from about middle school or so, I did become like a sports fan, and I love the competition element of it. So
Right.
that's for me, it's kind of part of a lot of what it's about.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't have to be someone who enjoys the physical aspect of sports at all
Right.
to enjoy. Now, I think in my experience, and maybe I'm too influenced by Harris, but um, the more people focus on stats
Mm-hmm.
and analytics, the more they get stuck in the weeds. And that if you don't, I didn't actually start to be successful uh, in my estimation. Like my level of success in fantasy football increased tremendously when I started watching the games,
Mm.
watching the players, looking for things. Um, and a lot of times it's just intuitive. There's nothing objective about what I see. It's
Mm-hmm.
just it could just be a confluence of things. This guy looks like he's enjoying himself. He's getting up over the line more often than this other guy. Just little things. Like I'll see that I'm like, man, he's having a good year, or he's going to be really good in the next few. Nobody notices
Yeah.
that this guy is. Um and also you can see a certain amount of commitment, I think, when you're looking at the games and you see their from a psychologist or a counselor's side of things. Like I like to look and see, like, how are they getting along with the coach, how are they getting along with the other teammates,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because we've seen recently uh, team dynamics can really affect production.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Look
Or even if the player is on the field or still
at
with that team, like Antonio Brown,
oh my gosh, how crazy! How crazy,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
So, Antonio Brown recently showed up. So he got traded from the
Pitt-
Steelers.
Yeah.
Go ahead to the Raiders. Just that alone was sort of crazy because the Raiders is led by a kind of this crazy coach, ex-commentator,
Right.
ex-coach.
Well, and the crazy thing about it is Antonio Brown is one of probably the three best receivers in football.
Well,
And so,
he was the best receiver, I think,
well, yeah,
at one point.
yeah, and I mean, yeah, and now I think like worst case scenario, you've got like, him and DeAndre and maybe Julio, just like top three. So like,
Beckham. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So he's just a top guy. And normally if a team has a top player, like they are not getting rid of him. So the fact that he
Yeah.
was enough of a problem for them to be like, okay, we're going to trade you and really not even get that much in return. We've just got to get rid of you. Tells you like, yeah, like how much of a problem he was and
So
how,
yeah, you could tell something was going on.
Yeah. Well, and with him, I always say like Antonio Brown has crazy eyes. Like I'm normally someone who like, gives this like thoughtful, like what I think is like, thoughtful, insightful analysis and blah, 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 and all this stuff. Like to me, he is one of those dudes. You can look at him in the eyes and see that he has crazy eyes. Like he's looking off in the distance, like, what's that dog doing over there? Is that dog silently judging me? Because I will fight him,
Well, I never noticed the crazy eyes, but you could hear the steady drum beat from the from reporters of the bickering and the infighting in the team it seemed to be coming from him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so he got traded over to the Raiders and all of a sudden shows up with frostbitten feet from his cryogenic whatever pod and then goes missing. Nobody knows where he is. I think he really damaged his feet, and he's making up the story about he wants to wear his old rickety helmet that probably gave him brain damage.
Right. Right.
It's interesting.
Yeah, it's a mess. Yeah, you do see like, yeah, in terms of team dynamic, that can make a real difference.
Yeah, and then you can also see, so on the other side of the spectrum, someone like Carson Wentz. Now, he hasn't been hugely successful, but I sort of got in early on him because I saw his who's the coach for the Raiders? What's his name?
John Gruden.
Yeah, John Gruden. So John Gruden used to do these interviews with young quarterbacks, quarterbacks coming into the league, and I saw that one. And John Gruden's crazy, but you could see when Carson Wentz talked, he was eloquent. He's very, very smart. His football intelligence was way up there, but he also just his vocabulary. When he talked about things, you're like, man, this he's interesting to talk to. I thought, man, and it turns out he's a Christian too. So it was just like, I want to own him. Oh, this sounds so weird. I want to own him.
I want a piece of you.
I want a piece of that guy. Strange. But yeah.
Speaking of which, I saw someone someone slammed Brad Evans on Twitter for he was talking about the Duke Johnson trade from Cleveland to Houston, and he's like, I forget what he said, like this situation is sexy for him, and for Duke Johnson, it's a sexy situation or something like that. Like basically saying he was gonna, he was in a better situation, or whatever. And it's a term that he throws around a lot, and someone was just like, you throw that around a lot. Maybe there's some projection there. Maybe you need to stop just a complete, like your average, like Twitter, takedown of someone. So
what do they call dunking on? Trying to dunk on him?
I guess so.
That's like a new term that people are using for Twitter, like dunking.
Yeah, I've seen it before. I think I thought dunking on someone was kind of like a lesser person, like, and then you like slamming a lesser person, but that may or may not be accurate. I'm not sure.
That sounds right. I just seen it a lot.
Yeah,
people talking about dunking on, but
yeah.
So how did he react?
He was just like, I can't remember what he said, but he gets combative. He's like combative, like I am with people on Twitter, and
but in a good-natured way.
He goes
not
after
good-natured, not good-natured, but in a
very he'll get sarcastic
way, not in an insecure way.
No, not really in an insecure way. No. So yeah, so there is some of that terminology there with it.
Yeah.
But not to derail what you were saying about Carson Wentz, though. So who I like this year, actually, as like an underrated, I think his draft stock is lower than maybe. I think he's rising. Like I was getting him on those early teams that I drafted. Like I was getting him in the late rounds.
You can get him with your last pick. Really.
Yeah. And then now, like other people have been like the analysts have been moving him up their charts, and so I think he like on Matthew Berry's he's like sixth or something now. So you probably can't get him that cheap anymore. But yeah, I think if he can stay healthy, he should have a good year. But
Now
health
that's
is
the thing. That's the thing. And so all the different dimensions of football, and then you add the dimension of fantasy football,
Mhm.
where um so the draft to me is
Yeah,
like cocaine, man. I love I've never had cocaine, but I imagine I
yeah.
love drafting. I
Same. I ended up with like 25 teams last year, and I will never do that. I will never do that again. I'm going to hold it to like 15 this year, which is still probably too many. But I've seen guys that have, and they must have like a group of people managing, because I've seen guys with 100+ teams.
Oh, I couldn't do that.
I couldn't.
I pared down to 6 teams last year. I was very had a self-discipline.
Yeah,
But this year I am just getting into drafting so much. And that's the problem is like
yeah.
I am not going to do well in these teams because I'm not going to follow them all. But I got to my limit on Yahoo on the Yahoo app of like they won't let me draft anymore unless I get, like
Really? What is the limit?
I don't know, but it's public leagues. You have
That
a
can't.
certain
It's got to be something different, because I mean, like I had 25 public teams last year. So unless you've got more than that, it's got to be some like glitch or something.
No, I don't have one. I can't. Well, I don't know what's going on because they tell me no, 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 no. What public leagues are the ones you pay for?
Yeah.
Okay, okay, yeah. No,
Oh,
it's the other one.
you got a
Whatever
limit
that's
on
called.
you've got a limit on private leagues.
Private leagues. There's a
Okay.
limit on private
Okay.
leagues.
Okay. I didn't know that.
You
Yeah.
can have unlimited public leagues, of
Yeah, they
course.
will take
They
your
make
money.
money.
They'll take your
Yeah.
money all day on that. Yeah. Yeah, no, you're right though. Yeah, drafting, it's
Mm,
like you've got all these exponential Venn diagram factors where you're trying to find the sweet spot with the NFL players themselves. And then it's the same thing with your draft too,
yeah.
because it's everything from what type of league you're in, because it can be full PPR, half point PPR, or standard.
Mhm.
Yahoo leagues are half point PPR, which means all that means is that you get a half of a point for each reception that
Every catch, yeah.
one of your players makes. But it makes a difference in terms of the stats, and that was part of the reason. Those were the two big changes last year. Is they changed one of those receiver positions to a flex, and they added in half point PPR. And I'd never played those before, and I didn't really account for those as much as I should have. And so, like I said, I still made money, but it was a down year for me. So I think I'll do better this year. But so you got that. So you got the format of the league. Then you've got the number of teams that are in the league. You can like standards 10, but you can have 12, 14, 16, whatever, almost.
And it's
Um,
a completely different league between like 8-team league and the difference
yes,
between an 8-team league and a 14 league. They're not. It's not even. You have to have a completely different strategy.
you do.
Complete.
And the bigger the league, the more number of players in it, the more you have to know the little ins and outs of maybe not necessarily the game, but of the players, because you've got
Yeah.
to fill out your roster with more with guys with more question marks, or more that are like their roles are uncertain.
Well,
And
depth
so
chart. So
mhm,
that's one of the biggest revelations for me was memorizing depth charts, like
mm,
knowing who the backup, particularly for running backs because they get hurt so much, knowing who the backups are. I
mhm,
think, not in terms of handcuffs necessarily, but just knowing who so when you hear somebody goes down,
yeah,
somebody gets hurt, you know immediately who to go pick up.
right, right. Um, yeah, yeah. Well, and then drafting, as much fun as it is, like that's to me the most fun, apart from winning. Um, but as much fun as drafting is, really though, then where you make your team to me is within the season with waiver wire pickups and managing it and stuff like that, because you can screw up your team at the beginning of the season with your draft, but you can't really win the league with your draft generally. And
Mhm.
so it's really that like week to week waiver wire management, because it's funny to always like we get so into the draft, and then I look at my team at the end of the season, and sometimes there may be like 2 or 3 players that I drafted that are
Yeah.
actually, either in my lineup or maybe on my roster at all.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of funny in a way to like look back and look back and see like who I drafted, where
Yeah.
players were ranked. And that's why, and that's another reason too, is, like rankings are almost, they give you a better, they give you a sort of a framework to go by.
Even starting place.
They give you a starting place. Yeah. But I advocate for, if you know it well enough, go your own way with it, because you look back at the end of every season and and it's completely different than what the experts or analysts had them ranked at as at the beginning of the season.
Yeah.
I believe I've learned more to. Okay, so do you want to get into? Do you have any other general stuff, or do you want to get into a little bit about this season in particular to talk about,
Um.
or do you want to avoid some of that? I mean, I don't want to get like too specific.
We'll talk a little bit about it, but save most of it because I have a fantasy podcast that I'm going to revive called Roto Hackers, and I'd like you to come on and talk. So me and a guy that sort of took under my wing, high schooler, just real intelligent guy. We get together every now and then and talk on a podcast about these things, and so maybe that would be a better place to talk about the specifics of this season. But in general, like, what has your experience been this season, this year?
So a couple of things I noticed this season, or the way I'm approaching it, is like after like the first. Okay, well, I'll put it this way: like normally, I like to draft typically running backs first, at least one within the first 2 rounds. And I think still, if you get like a top 4 or 5 pick, you're still better off going that way, because you've got some guys at the top that are as close to a sure bet as you can get, like with Christian McCaffrey and Alvin Kamara, Ezekiel Elliott, if he, as long as he doesn't hold out, Saquon Barkley and stuff like that. But I think this year, like once you get past those first 4 or 5 guys, you're probably better off and safer, like taking a receiver in the first round or 2 over a running back, because to me, you start to get into a lot of question marks with the running backs this year, like pretty quickly. And so I've still been trying to do like a receiver and a running back in the first 2 rounds. Then though, receivers to me though, like drop off fast after like the end of the second round, start of the third round, to where like I'm trying to avoid, like I generally have been avoiding taking a receiver anywhere from like middle of the third round through 4, 5, probably even 6.
The drop off is more precipitous, I think, for the wide receivers.
I think so too. Yeah, like even though I think there are more the questions come faster with the running backs, the receivers you can get through kind of those first couple rounds, maybe into the third round a little bit, and still have like a really solid guy. But after that, to me, the difference between the guys that are going, like rounds 3, 4, 5, 6, and the guys that are going like 7, 8, maybe 9, like I don't know, like where those are going to shake out at the end of the season. Like you get a guy like Boyd, Tyler Boyd, or Chris Godwin, or Cooper Kupp, who was in our trade this week. To me, like those guys may end up with basically the same numbers as a guy like Stephon Diggs or Amari Cooper or Robert Woods or Brandon Cook, And so what I've been trying to do is, if it works out the way I would like for it to work out, I would get like running back, wide receiver, tight end in the first 3 rounds, because I've been trying to make more of a point to get an elite tight end this year. And then as soon as I do that, then there's probably going to be like three more guys that are elite tight ends that you could get cheap in later rounds this year. But so do that in the first 3 rounds, and then basically like use rounds, either like the late third or fourth and fifth, to get a bunch of those running backs that are just kind of like clumped together that I don't know who's going to have the better season, and you don't
Yeah.
know, and these analysts don't know. I mean,
Mhm.
guys from, but to me, I mean, those start anywhere from like, in a way, they start anywhere from like the, kind of the middle of the second round, because, it's guys like, you know,
Mark Ingram and
yeah,
um,
yeah,
some
like,
of these rookies. Yeah.
right, right. So like, Dalvin Cook is going like as like a mid second round pick, generally the Vikings running back. Is he going to have
Not
a
that high second round, but yeah.
that, like all my leagues, that's he's been going anywhere from like mid second round to, late second round. Maybe he slipped to like top of the third in one or two. But but with him, you've got him, and then you've got, like, yeah, like you said, like Mark Ingram with the Ravens or Chris Carson with the Seahawks, who you can get in the fifth, maybe even the sixth. Are
Mhm.
are some of those guys, is a guy like Dalvin Cook gonna have a better season than one of those guys? Like, I don't know. And so,
Yeah.
I've been trying to take a lot of those guys because I think they're just better values. You
Yeah.
can get a guy that, may have a better season in some of those rounds. And so to me, that's where I'm trying to take my running backs, is like, 3, 4, 5, because there's just so many question marks. So a lot of it, is just,
See, I think the thing is, for me, it's not necessarily about where you take them, but how many you take them, how many you take.
mhm,
Somebody was in the chat. Actually, we have somebody, Nathan K, is talking about guys and whether or not to take some of these guys coming off injury.
mhm.
I'm avoiding everybody coming off a major injury. I haven't seen, in my own personal investigation, I have not found I haven't seen anybody come off a major injury and really do well. I mean, the one everybody points to is always Adrian Peterson, and even he had. I mean, he hasn't been this. He was just way up here, and so he didn't come back as like he didn't come back all gimpy, of course, and he came back fast. But still, I have not seen you. It's hard to name anybody that's come off of major injury and been right back at the top or been really successful for.
Well, I think the problem with guys too is the guy you just mentioned is Adrian Peterson's there,
Oh,
and
that's
that
true.
and
Yeah.
they've got Chris Thompson as a receiving back,
Mm.
and Washington's offense is probably going to be run by a rookie quarterback. And so I am not drafting any Redskins players because their running back situation's a mess. Their receivers are not good. Their tight end Jordan Reed, is just always hurt. So that's one team that I'm completely, like, them, and the Dolphins, and maybe even like the Broncos. I'm just completely avoiding. Like, there's no player that I care to, really own out of those situations.
Well, but the question is there value to be had in any of these? Like, is there any diamond in the rough for we're getting into like fantasy analytics, and I kind of want to stay away from and do that more on the Roto Hackers podcast. But um briefly, uh because there is a dynamic, I think, that really, so just talking overall, like just
Mhm,
somebody who doesn't know about fantasy,
mhm,
there is this aspect of like being able to put intelligence, look at information and organize it
mhm.
in a way that can make you successful. So one of the ways is making decisions based off of, like, I don't know, like what you're saying. Like, is the team any good? Well, we don't know really. Washington could be really good next year.
Right,
In NFL, we have no idea.
right.
I mean, okay, well, no, that's not true. We don't have no idea. We have we have ideas, but often our ideas are proved wrong in the
Mhm.
NFL. Just weird things happen all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
Everybody thinks that Cleveland Cavaliers, that the Cleveland Browns are going to be amazing this year. It's going to be, the narrative is going to be wonderful, where they're going to dominate everything. They have all these great players. I am very wary of taking a lot of Browns. I'll take Chubb and Beckham, but I'm staying far from Mayfield, even though I kind of like Mayfield. I'm not.
Really? See, I like Mayfield. I think he's a pretty good value if you can get him like in the 8th or so.
I'd rather go with someone like who's the Florida guy down there? Names escape.
Jameis Winston.
Jameis.
Yeah,
Famous
I
Jameis.
mean, Jameis is going undrafted in most 10-team leagues, so yeah, you can get. Yeah, I mean, there's an argument to make for Jameis. Bruce Arians, the old Cardinals coach, is a pass happy coach. Has a good relationship, with Jameis. So, I think Jameis is one of those guys that he could end up being like a, on like maybe a top quarterback. I don't know. He's just so unpredictable. I mean, he's still going to have games where he throws no touchdowns and 4 INTs, but like for the season, he could end up having like a really high, good stats.
Oops. And he runs a lot more than people give him credit for. But so if you want to hear more of that, come listen to us on the Roto Hackers podcast. So we're going to start back up at least, I don't know, maybe next week. But to get a little less, to get out of the weeds a little bit, what would you say to somebody who says, I don't want to get it? It's like fantasy football is just gambling. It's like nerds that want to be involved with sports and they just get hooked on the gambling aspect of it.
Yeah, there's a debate about that mainly in when you start getting into debates about states implementing fantasy football, because we've had this big, like, kind of whirlwind thing where daily fantasy was going away in a lot of states because it was getting classified as gambling, and so I think New York banned it, and so
Florida too, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it was a couple of some of the major states, and then and then now, like, the sports betting bill got passed, and so then now, like, it's like suddenly where it looked like it was heading in a direction where some of the stuff might go away, then all of a sudden it just did a 180, and now you're not only talking about daily fantasy coming back stronger, but I work in North Carolina, and there's a bill going through now to where a couple of these casinos on reservation, technically, they're like reservation land, I guess, casinos can have college football betting and stuff like that. So so a lot of states have then now implemented stuff where you can go to I've got a buddy who lives in Alabama, and he drives to Mississippi to a casino there to place wagers on college games and stuff like that. So it's been interesting to see how quickly that's turned around. But man, it's such a gray area in terms of, that's one of those things that I can kind of see the argument on both sides for, in terms of I guess going back specifically to fantasy, because people will say it's a skill game. Well, it is. And then people will say, and then people who want it to be classified exclusively as gambling will say, look at this person who won this daily fantasy game. It was like some grandma who had never, this was her first time like placing a bet because her grandson, got her a team, and she just spent, $10, $20 or whatever to get a team, and she just randomly picked them and won that way. So that's possible to do it too. So you can make an argument for it both ways. I guess just the best way I could put it is just, like your skills, your knowledge of it, give you better chances. So, it's sort of it's a little bit of a gray area.
I think a better analogy, a better comparison, or in the fantasy world, they say comp, a better comp would be, would be stocks. I think it's a
Mhm.
better version of
Yeah.
stocks in the sense that, and a lot of people talk about having shares of this person, having and
Sure.
spreadsheets and this and that, and and having portfolios of like leagues that they're in. Because if you're really intentional about it, you can, like you can make money off of it,
Mhm.
good money, in the sense of like playing the odds,
Right.
as it goes back to these different dimensions, multi-layered approaches, not just in your knowledge of football, which I think that brings an added benefit, an added fun aspect to it, like
Mhm.
that stocks don't have, like, oh, look, my Facebook stock, like, well, I mean, I guess politically it can, it ties into politics,
Mhm.
but the sports tie-in, to me, you can actually watch your investment run around and do stuff, you
Yes.
know? Like, that's kinda cool.
That's a good way
Um,
to put it. Yeah, you can watch your investment run around and do stuff, you know? So it's basically like having kids, you know?
yeah.
You have a lot of money invested in kids, but
Yeah, that
they
is
don't
true,
really
but
bring that much return, I guess.
eventually they actually do bring a lot of return, but it's more,
Yeah, it's more like emotional. Yeah.
emotional return. And I can't just drop them and invest in a different stock or a different.
You could. I mean, it's, like, generally frowned upon, but it's
Well, okay, so
illegal, but
might get DCFS involved.
right.
Um, what is your takeaway? Like, getting into the value of playing fantasy football, what it brings to your life, what you learn from it. Do you have any like takeaway for people that might be interested in getting into it? But as as we reverse redact and we talk about these things in a way that we try to get something more out of it than just facts and data and stuff.
Mhm.
What kind of meaning do you derive from fantasy football as we reverse redact it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of the things that we've kind of touched on. One of the things you touched on was community. Um, Sometimes it can be like a really combative community because especially if you're in a public, I mean within your league specifically, because if you're in a league with a bunch of jerks, but
Yeah,
sometimes that can be kind of fun too. Obviously if you beat them, but so you can either have community in the form of some fun interactions with people that you've never met before and maybe you won't ever see again. My most fun league last year was a $50 league. I had $100 leagues, $250 leagues.
ooh, wow.
The most fun I had was a $50 league where like everybody was into it. Just everybody was into it. People were making trades. You had a couple of guys that were just really mouthy on the message board, and it was. I wish every league was like that one. So one of the things, yeah, is like you said, is community. Another one again for me is just like competition, just being able to be competitive and kind of test yourself
Yeah.
in ways to see like, can I can I put something together that beats what these other guys have? And it's not all, you're depending on real live human beings to execute this for you. And so you can't, it's not all on you. Sometimes no matter how many good decisions you make, you your team may fail, or you can have a great team. You could have a team that goes undefeated in the regular season and then loses in the playoffs,
Yeah.
loses in the first round of the playoffs. So
Mhm.
um, there's a lot of, and I guess that kind of, brings me to another point is just kind of like, kind of the highs and lows of it, is I think with fantasy football, I hear people that at the end of every season, they're like, I'm never doing this again because they, because they have just gotten screwed over, through mostly like a lot of times it may be no fault of their own, but they've just gotten screwed over by injuries and all these things. And then they're like, I'm never doing this again. I'm never playing this stupid game again. And then by like April, they're like, when does sign up start? When does sign up
Yeah.
start for the new season? You know,
Every year I delete every fantasy football every fantasy football app out of my phone and swear off of it. And
that's funny.
then
And then
sometime in April, I'm
and
like,
then you come crawling back. You come crawling back. Yeah. Another thing too that I noticed with me is that it kind of gives me something to do in terms of I will watch the most meaningless, terrible, boring NFL game because I will have a player involved, a fantasy football player involved in that game. I remember I was watching Texans Bengals on like Thanksgiving or the day before Thanksgiving one year.
Yeah.
It was 3-3 at halftime. And I'm just sitting here questioning my life choices to play fantasy football to get myself involved in watching this game that I would otherwise never care about,
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I think it's great. I think it brings all kinds of, all kind and again, the money aspect. Every year I've had one year where I didn't make, or one year where I lost money, and every other year I make, generally about $1,000 on fantasy football.
It's really good.
So
And it's like you said to me the other day, it's like second place is the sweet spot.
yes, it
I don't
is.
know if it's sweet spot. I mean, it'd be nice to have first place everywhere, but
Yeah.
Last year I got second place everywhere, and I was really disappointed. But then, because I hadn't played for money. Actually, you're the one who started. You got the bug into me. But so last year I started playing for money,
Mhm.
and I didn't realize the second place gets payout.
Yeah.
I thought you had to be first place, and so like I got like one league I got like $100 and something. I had only paid 25. I was like, how does that work?
Yeah. Yeah, for public leagues, and I play, and a lot of times it's kind of hard to do it. You can't completely do it in your draft because that's so far away. It's 4 months away nearly. You don't know exactly how it's going to go. But to a certain extent, from the time I start drafting to the time I start playing waivers and stuff like that, like I am building my team to get to the playoffs and win week 15, which is the fantasy football semifinals. Because if you do, you triple your money. And so if it's a $50 league, you win $150. If it's a $250 league, you win $750. And
just getting to the semifinals
and winning it. You have to get there and win the semifinals.
Does third place win anything?
Third place, if you lose in the semifinals, you go on to the consolation game. And if you win the consolation game in week 16, you win whatever was the buy-in for the league. So you would just break even. So the thing for me, like I will get players, like I start trying to stock players who I think have the best like week 15 schedule. So I'll start like if I get in a league where I'm ahead, like I see like, okay, clearly I'm going to make the playoffs even if I collapse. I may trade for a guy who is having a lesser season than a guy I have, but if my guy has a terrible matchup in week 15 and the other guy has a great matchup, then you're running a risk because you never know. I mean, sometimes it can go against what you think is going to happen. A player can have a great game against a great defense, and a player can have a terrible game against a terrible defense. But like my winning, I calculated it up, and like this is crazy. I had to do this several times just like to actually verify that this was right. But like my winning percentage, I don't always get to the playoffs with every team, but my winning percentage in week 15 is like 74%, like lifetime.
Wow.
And so I was like, wow, I didn't. And so I'm always afraid that's going to, like, just the law of averages is going to catch up to me and I'm going to come crashing back down. But like, that's what I build them for and start like playing towards, because I mean, it's great then if I go on and win the championship, which then adds on like, I forget what the percentage is. If it's but anyway, so like if you're in $100 league, again, you're guaranteed 300 if you win in the semifinals. If you
Yeah.
go on and win the championship, it adds 200 more. So you get, 500 your money.
Nice,
But
nice
if
little premium.
yeah, but if you don't get there in the first place, it doesn't, it doesn't matter. And so,
Mhm.
so yeah, I try to build to win that week, because then you're guaranteed to triple your money. And then if I go on, and so I will intentionally get players who have a great week 15 matchup, but may have a terrible week 16 matchup. Like I'll take that trade off.
Yeah,
So that's what I try to build mine for. But
I like
yeah.
that.
So just all those little things. Yeah, I love fantasy football. I don't see myself ever quitting it.
Oh man. So for me, it's any kind of connection. I mean, this thing we do, reverse redaction, the thing I do with Ford and his podcast, the thing. I mean, you've had discussions with Steven.
Steven. Yeah, Steven and I do a
Yeah.
lot of like Marvel stuff, and things like that. So
I think that this isn't, there's people that connect, there's guys that connect over Marvel and movies, and I think that's good. And yeah, often that's what we connect on over here in reverse redaction. But there's a special connection for those of us that are fantasy football enthusiasts. I think because there's a little bit more, there's a lot more buy-in, and there's a little bit more salivating. Like it's that
yeah,
greed. There's a little bit more greed. I'll be honest.
yeah,
There's money involved.
mhm,
There's buy-in and money involved, and I think it brings men in particular, and men and women. There's lots of women in fantasy football together like nothing else I've ever, other than religion. um, it's a pastime that brings it's unlike any other pastime I've ever seen because it's so ubiquitous. There is a common set of facts that people can discuss and argue and what have you, but it doesn't have the same toxicity as politics, which people can be brought together through politics, but there isn't
mhm,
the same polarization, you know,
mhm,
and there isn't the same tie into religion and
right,
that sort of thing. I mean, other than Kaepernick, but
yeah,
I think that for me, the magic of fantasy football is being able to bring so many men together. And I say particularly men, because I think women have other things that they, and I have no problem with women getting involved in fantasy. It's just they tend to not like it. But it brings men together in a way that to talk and to discuss and to use their intellect
mhm,
in a way that only money managers,
mhm,
high level money managers get to partake in on a regular basis. And it helps us move away from, I think it helps intellectualize sort of a Neanderthal type endeavor that sports can be. Beer drinking and watching a game can be pretty basic, but you add the component of fantasy football to it and you have stuff to debate,
yeah.
as far as data points, um, that you could have before watching the game, but adds a buy-in component to it.
And there's and I mean there's a lot of differences between politics, and you don't, fortunately you don't have like outrage mongers for the most part with fantasy football, like, oh, you're drafting Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones is a liberal Democrat who's going to try to destroy your state. So you got one of those, but then two,
Yeah.
like you've got like you can see you get a start and a finish at the end
Mhm.
of each season.
Yeah.
You can see who was right, you can see who
Yeah.
was wrong, and you could be right or wrong and still come out. You could be right and still lose, or wrong and still win, because there's
Yeah.
so many different players and factors involved. But you can see who was right about a player or who was right about this or that. And so
In a way that's much more complicated and meaningful than buying a lottery ticket. Like you
mhm.
could be right or wrong on a lottery ticket too, but not in
Well,
the same, not even close to the same way in intellectual engagement.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, a lottery ticket is completely chance. Like even if it's a game where you pick the right numbers, you had no idea. I mean that those numbers there's no way to know. So yeah, yeah, it is sort of a there is like intellectual value to it and intellectual validation, I guess, in a way.
Mhm. And going back to what you said, uh, I often explain to my wife my love for it. Like I say, eh, as a counselor, so my primary profession has been for a long time a counselor. As
Mhm.
a counselor, my job, my career, my profession, I I go in and I talk to people, try to help them with their situation, but there's no like it's not putting data sets together and ideas together to, like you said, at the end of the day, you're either right or wrong. Like in my job, it's just I'm participating in a thing. I'm getting paid to sort of help, but I'm not seeing results.
Mhm.
Like I don't see results like you can see with fantasy football. There's
Yeah.
the engagement and manipulation of not manipulation, but to a certain level of control that you have. Where you can make decisions
Yeah.
and pick pick your battles, put your flag in certain ideas, and you get to see whether or not you were right.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I've got my first bachelor's degree was in psychology, and I'm really glad that I got the degree. But then as I got like into the first year of a grad program, I realized like, man, for me, I'm really not going to be happy unless I'm in some type of work where I can get tangible results.
Result.
You know, I've just got to have that. And you're exactly right. Like fantasy football, it does deliver that for you. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And a lot of times on an immediate basis, you can see, I mean, you win or lose every week.
yeah, yeah.
It's not just the end of the season.
Well, and some of like the most memorable league that I've ever had was, and this was relatively high dollar for me, high dollar, like $250 league. Yahoo now has that's another thing that's been funny for me to see, like how those have grown to where you can now have a $500 league, you can have $1,000 buy-in, or you can have a $5,000 buy-in for a Yahoo public league.
Wow. Have you
Uh,
thought about doing that?
no, no, I
No.
wouldn't put because really, to me, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to buy 6 teams because again, going back to math and probability, I think I can get 4 to the playoffs, and
Mhm.
then I think that I can probably win 2 of those to get to the championship, and so and then maybe one of those 2 wins it all. And so that's my way of breaking down like what's going to be the best way for me to make money. And the year that I made the most money was exactly that. I bought 6 $250 teams. Um,
Mm.
I got 4 of them to the playoffs. I'm trying to think how many won their semifinal game. I can't remember, but anyway, I came out with $2,500 profit.
Wow.
So because so it was like 6 times 250 is 1,500, and so I won 4,000, but $2,500 profit. Um, so I wouldn't buy a 5,000. I would never buy, even if I had the money to, I would never buy a $5,000 team because I would have to buy like 6 $5,000 teams. I mean, and I'm not going to
Yeah.
spend $30,000 on it, that type
Mhm.
of risk. But, but I would consider maybe a 500, doing $500 teams, but not above that unless I just got independently wealthy. But go,
Yeah.
going back to what I was going to say, like the most memorable team that I have was during that year that I did those 6 250 teams. I had a team that started 1-5. But then I looked at it, but I'm like, man, this is a good team though. I've just had like bad luck. And I saw like what my schedule looked like the teams that I was playing. And I thought, I think I can get to the playoffs with this still. And so I came back and I got to 7-6, and I needed to win in order to get into the playoffs, to finish 8-6 to get in the playoffs. But I was down by a good bit. I needed Jordy Nelson to just blow up for a huge game. And Jordy Nelson had like 150 yards and 2 touchdowns,
Wow.
like on a Monday night game to put me over the
Nice.
top to get me into the playoffs. And then I won my semifinal game. I ended up losing the championship, but I won my semifinal game. So what could have been a $250 loss, I ended up winning 750 on had a $500 profit. And so I'll always be a Jordy Nelson fan because of him pushing and just of that team in general, because it was just so memorable to come back from being down that far. So just just little things like that that are always gonna kind of like stick with you, you know.
Same thing happened to me. I won. I was down. Yeah, I think I had to get 500 to be in the playoffs. I had lost all my games, and I forget how I got in. Your way of getting in was more memorable, but it was the final game.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I had picked up CJ Anderson based off of the analysis of the fantasy football guys. I want to mention them: Cecil Lammey, Sigmund Bloom, Dr. Gene Bramall, and Matthew. What's his name? I can't remember. Matt Waldman. These guys, they're not. It's less about being right, for them, and more just about like the art of fantasy.
Okay.
Like they are old guys. They've been in the industry for so long and especially, Sigmund Bloom, when he talks, he formulates these sentences that are just laden with, he just has this style that I love.
Right.
Bringing the intellect into fantasy football. But anyways, they told me to pick, or they suggested they loved CJ Anderson.
Now, was this how long ago was this? Was this when he was with like Broncos or just like last year with? Oh, okay, I wasn't sure if this was
the Broncos.
Gotcha.
So the fantasy football, what are they called? The Audible is Cecil Lammey he's actually I think on the payroll for the Broncos. But anyways, so like CJ Anderson just blew up for me that day. Like it was like his second game. I think he was a rookie.
Yeah.
And he caught so many passes, and it was a PPR league. It was my first time ever being in a PPR league. He single-handedly won the championship for me. Like I think he had like 60 points, 50 points for me that game.
That was like that. That's like Todd Gurley 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I can't remember. It was 2. Yeah, I think it was 2 years ago.
3
years ago. Maybe it's 3. Yeah, where he like my teams weren't even overall that good because I'd had so many injuries and stuff. And I think it was that year where you're talking about where like Deshaun Watson got hurt and just everybody got hurt. And so I was just down. Like I made it there, but I had nothing besides Todd Gurley. And the Seahawks were supposed to be like, they were one of the best defenses. And, and he ran for like 6 touchdowns, like 5 or 6 touchdowns.
Over them. Yeah, I remember
insane. It was insane. So yeah, Todd Gurley's another guy that like you for CJ Anderson is just like another guy that just like owns a special place in my heart forever from that.
But see, what happens is for me, that's the downfall. The next year I went and I picked him up first in the first round, and he did nothing for me that whole year.
No.
And I have to be careful not to fall in love with players, because I'll fall in love with a player and I'll just like, be their biggest fan and have them in all my leagues and they will just let me down.
That's where we're different. That's where I go back to being, data, as you once mentioned out, or where it's just like completely emotionless about it. Or I guess I'm the Belichick of the fantasy football industry. Like no matter what player you are or how many Super Bowls we've won together, like if I don't think you're going to have a good year, or if I think even if I think your draft stock is overvalued, if you're like going as a high second rounder and I think you're a low third rounder, like, sorry, bro, thanks for what you did for me last year, but I'm not taking you this year. I'm just completely a mercenary about it from year to year.
You are a mercenary, though, more than fantasy football.
True.
I like that.
True.
The mercenary. I have to come back to that.
Right.
Well, we have gone way long, but it was a great conversation. It's one of my passions in
Yep.
life is fantasy football, and I hope somebody can get something out of what we talked about. I keep thinking about if Ford were to be with us, would he stick with? No, he probably wouldn't. We even lost our one fantasy football guy who was watching with us. I think when we started talking more philosophical about fantasy football,
Yeah, he was just like, he just wanted to know about Darius Geis, you know. He just came for that.
I got a friend who calls Darius Geis juice. I got
Yeah,
juice. Should I keep juice?
nice.
All right. Well, I got to sign off. Go mow the lawn. It's been a good conversation, brother.
It has. Thanks for having me.
And for anybody that wants to hear more of getting deeper into fantasy football, what do you think about doing Wednesday evenings?
Yeah,
After
Wednesdays are typically good for me.
Okay, I'll check in with my AJ. What's he call himself? AJ Herschel is the nomenclature he goes by.
Okay.
As a high school student, he doesn't want to give out his real name, which I think is cautious
Yeah,
and good.
that's good. That's good.
But we'll check in with him, and we'll probably do it on this format on Roto Hackers if anybody's interested. Roto Hackers, so YouTube /Roto Hackers. You can Google Roto Hackers, you'll find us. Till we talk again. Have a wonderful weekend.
All right, man. You too. Take care.